it should be unlocked.
Yeah.
Yes, so people can wander in.
All right. Hi, everybody. So welcome. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Lisa. I am an assistant professor of voice, speech, and acting here at TDPS.
And I'm Victoria. I'm a third-year graduate student. My research interests are performance and protest, and I've done dramaturgy for Lisa on productions here in the school and outside of the school. So we've worked together on a few things before this project.
Yeah, so it felt like a perfect time to collaborate and continue research. So this is a presentation. It's called Freeing the Global Female Voice. And it was our New Zealand research trip. So we, over the course of 2 weeks, we're in New Zealand. We started in Auckland and we traveled to Rotorua and also Wellington to meet with various universities and learn as much as we could about New Zealand, specifically Maori and Pacific vocal practices.
And this was, of course, made possible by the International Program for Creative Collaboration and Research, the IPCCR, which some people in this room are familiar with. And if you're not, you should check out our website, talk to us, and find out what we're all about, because we're supporting projects like this and other opportunities for international research and collaboration.
Yeah, and a huge thank you to IPCCR for making this possible, especially. Yes, all right, so shall I start?
Yes.
All right, so this was a group of the women that we worked with while we were abroad. But to start you off, welcome to New Zealand. Good. So that just gives you a little taste. One of my research focuses is about moving beyond a history of silence by investigating diverse female voices and developing pedagogy to empower women worldwide. So this trip came from where I'm at currently in terms of my field research, looking at vocal practices in other parts of the world where women are using their voices in strong and empowered ways. It started from my interest in Greek chorus, and this is actually from, this was a production that was sponsored through CAPA, Creative and Performing Artists Grant here at UMD, that Victoria assisted me on, was Hecuba, and that was when I first started investigating influences from Haka, influences from other New Zealand vocal practices as a way of unpacking and bringing to life specifically the choral odes in Greek drama.
Yeah, and so Lisa and I had talked briefly when we were working on this. I did the dramaturgy, and she was really inspired by the vocal practices used in something like Haka. But we had said, this is an indigenous people's practice. We don't know a lot about it. We did some reading, some research, but we felt really uncomfortable pursuing those styles of vocal practice without consulting with indigenous people who practice them. And so when the opportunity came up to do some travel later after this project, we're like, we need to look into this. We need to take this opportunity. So that's kind of where we were coming from
with that. Good. So the purpose of our trip was threefold. So the first was to lay the foundation for future educational exchanges and our performance collaborations between well-established Maori performance groups, New Zealand universities, and the University of Maryland School of Theatre, Dance, and Performance Studies. So that's one part of what we'll be sharing. And the other piece was to expand my own research focused towards female vocal empowerment by deeply experiencing and investigating empowered female vocal models from Maori and Pacific culture. So this included learning female Haka, looking at waiata, which is a type of song that we'll unpack, and also gleaning a greater understanding of karana, which is a vocal call that's done predominantly by women, also in Maori culture. And then third, I always strive to bring my research back and implement it in the classroom with my students. I think that especially looking at a more global vocal pedagogy, can also help students expand their own humanity and help them become more globally conscious young adults and citizens. So that's one of my own missions. So first we're going to talk about collaborations. So the opportunity for collaborations included opportunities for co-productions or performance collaborations with some of these universities. Some of the people we're going to introduce or talk about we could potentially bring here to UMD as guest speakers. This could happen tangibly by bringing them in person, or we could also bring them via global classrooms.
Yeah, so if any of the people that we're talking about sound like they might be of interest to you, they had almost everybody that we spoke with expressed a willingness to give a guest lecture through our global classrooms or to participate in some type of educational exchange. So we have our own ideas, but if you guys wanted to take advantage of those relationships, that's what this is all about too.
The other piece I was investigating was in terms of cultural exchange or study abroad opportunities. So there were some exciting possibilities for study abroad that came up for our undergrad students, and also opportunities for cultural exchange, possibly looking at down the road co-production between TDPS and one of the universities in New Zealand.
And Lisa is on the subcommittee for the study abroad program for the IPCCR. So.
Yes, that's part of it. All right. So one of our first visits was to Unitec, University in Auckland. This is actually Victoria and I got, it was about 2 hours. It was a good amount of time that we got to interview these two gentlemen here. They're two of the theater conservatory students at Unitec. They were super generous with us, giving us information about Haka, about Maori tradition. They're actually each from a different tribe originally, so I'll get into that in a moment. But while we were at Unitec, we were hosted by a friend and colleague of mine, Alexandra Whittam. She's another designated Linklater teacher. She brought us into Unitec. We got to participate in a number of their classes while we were there. We also had meetings with John Davies, who's the head of acting at Unitec. And I was specifically interested in meeting with him because he is currently doing research right now. Ooh, I skipped ahead. Sorry, me and technology don't agree. He is currently doing research regarding a Maori Bacchae. So he has involved collaborators from Greece as well, and they are bringing Maori culture together with Greek culture to create a Bacchae, which is exactly my wheelhouse in terms of my next kind of research steps. Good. So this is who they are. So in terms of cultural exchange, so Pukana is also one of the elements of Haka, right? See, I'm actually going to let our student here.
So basically,
But this was one of the classes we got to
pass it to the next person, and then Sam here can either pass it to Alex or you can pass it back to me. But the idea is that you do it with. So who kind of, if you've seen the All Blacks, is when they. Yeah, I can't do it very well, but it's when they stick their tongue in it.
And you do big eyes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll set up the
So the call is, what is it?
O tene te kemu o te pukana, righty, righty, pukana, 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 pukana.
So ten is again of the Pukana means this is the game of Pukana, literally. And then Raiti is something.
Good. Yes.
One of the reasons that we had asked them to teach us this game was we wanted to be able to bring back exercises to the voice classroom that weren't going to be stepping on traditional or sacred practices, because there's a huge crossover between secular and sacred dance and song in Maori culture. And so we were like, what warm-ups do you do that everybody can participate in that are still giving sort of a nod and providing knowledge to your culture? And everybody right away was like, the Pukana exercise, because it's about doing wide eyes and it's about sending energy through your voice and through your motions. And so this was one of the first things that they taught us, because they were like, this is something everybody can do. It doesn't infringe on anything that is going to be sacred to the Maori people, but it's a great exercise and sort of at the core of what their dance and song really gets at, which is sending energy through the face and through the mouth and eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So this next slide here, I want to actually, this is one of the students to give you a little more context for Pukana, for what this game is.
Do you guys want to do Pukana?
Okay, well then I suppose we will skip ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will make this available if anyone wants to see these more up close. But we spent a couple of days with these students.
And Lisa also gave them in exchange voice exercises as well. So there was a real, I think, educational exchange going on there. But Lisa can also tell you how to do this exercise with your students if you're interested.
Yeah. Part of the exchange was talking about theater practices in the U.S., a bit of American dialect exchange and whatnot. They were working on a production of Crucible. So one of the other stops that we made was we visited the University of Auckland. So at the University of Auckland, we had meetings with Dr. Emma Willis and Dr. Rena Kim. They're the advisors, also lecturers at the university, but Dr. Willis is the advisor for postgraduate at University of Auckland, and Rena is the advisor for undergrad. While we were here, we learned about some study abroad opportunities, specifically during the January term. There would be an existing program for undergraduate theater majors who want to go and study in Auckland that they can go and participate in. And we also, through a connection with Dr. Emma Willis, she put Victoria and I in contact with a woman named Tui Matira-Yanisfield. She is a prominent female Maori performer, an educator, and also the auntie of Mutai Maori Village, which is one of the places we got to go visit to also experience and learn more about cultural performance and local traditions. So she unpacked a lot, and I'm going to be using some of what she shared with us in terms of articles that I'm currently working on. Yes. So, moving ahead, one of the other places we visited was Victoria University in Wellington. While in Wellington, we also visited the big museum there. We got to sit down and have a long conversation with Professor David O'Donnell. So David is kind of on the forefront. He's written quite a bit that's out there, but one of his big texts is Performing Autoria, New Zealand Drama and Theater in an Age of Transition. So, do you want to speak a little bit more?
Aotearoa is the te reo, the Maori word for New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And David, if you couldn't tell, is Pakeha, which is the word for non-Indigenous person. But he was a really valuable person to talk to because he does a lot of work with Maori theater companies, mostly as a dramaturg and as a consultant. And it was really great to get the perspective of someone who works very closely as an advisor with Indigenous performers and theater companies, but who's not Indigenous himself. And so we had lots of questions about, how does this work? And how do you sort of make a professional claim in a field that is not necessarily your own? And he was very generous with his time and information, and if people are interested in what it's like to do dramaturgy or to work with Indigenous theater groups as a non-Indigenous person, I think he would be a really good person to reach out to, and he made himself available, and I think he'd be interested in talking to other folks too. So good contact in that respect.
Yeah, for me, he was really useful in providing a source to ask how can I actually move this research forward? What can I do? What's the difference between appropriation versus appreciation? And so he's wonderful for that. also while we were with Victoria University, this woman right here, Perry Piercy. So Perry Piercy is a fellow alumni from the Central School of Speech and Drama where I got my master's. She's also a voice teacher in New Zealand who's been working closely with Maori vocal practices and how that can come into the classroom and what can be gleaned from that. So this was part of an exchange that happened. I actually led an American accent workshop for these individuals. And of course, they taught me a little bit of their Aotearoa accent in return, so that was exciting. This was the last university that we visited, and this is actually one of the universities I'm most excited about possible study abroad opportunities, Toi Whakaari. So Toi Whakaari is a conservatory program in Wellington. This individual right here, this is John Hunter. He's also a friend, colleague, voice teacher at Toi Whakaari. But Toi Whakaari is built as a conservatory program. So there is a school of theater. There's also a school of dance. So it's much more similar to the model here at TDPS that we have. A lot of the faculty at Toi Whakaari is also really interested in the idea of using global classrooms for lecture, for rehearsal processes, for exchange. So that was that. Do you have an add anything?
No, that they had a beautiful campus, and that it would be a treat, I think, for any student to go there in an exchange program. It was quite nice. That's all I have to add to that. But yeah, overall, of all the universities that we visited, I think the conservatory style programs seemed to lend themselves much better to exchange with our program than a place like University of Auckland, which everybody was very friendly, but they have a very sort of regimented setup that just, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of willingness or room to develop anything that wasn't already there as like, oh, we have a study abroad program, you can apply to it and be in it. Whereas some of the conservatory schools were like, oh, we could do digital exchange, we could do a co-production in 2 different places, a little bit more of the artist's take on collaboration. So I thought that these seemed like much more sort of fruitful collaborations.
Yeah. Great. So moving ahead, we also visited, this was also stemming into my own research, so Takirua Productions is one of the prominent Maori production companies in New Zealand. So one of the possible exchanges, we got to meet with Tani Mahata Gray, who's the artistic director. This is Tani Mahuta right here. Tani Mahuta also connected us with a wonderful woman named Toni Huata. So for me in my research, she's also a prominent female Maori performer, and she teaches a lot of the Maori vocal practice that I am diving more deeply into. There's that. Good. So now we're getting into the other part of it, was research, right? So why were we actually in New Zealand? I was there. I wanted to unpack the traditions of Haka, Waiata, and Karanga. So this right here is actually, this is Te Reo Maori, but this is one of the songs that Victoria and I learned while we were staying on the marae. So Haka, what is Haka? Haka is a type of ancient Maori war dance traditionally used on the battlefield, as well as when groups came together in peace. Haka are a fierce display of a tribe's pride, strength, and unity. Actions include violent foot stamping, tongue protrusions, and rhythmic body slapping to accompany a loud chant. Now, a dictionary definition of Haka doesn't do it any justice, right? When we were over in New Zealand, especially getting to sit down and talk with so many of these students and individuals, visiting museums, there's so much more to it. There's so much about Haka that's also sacred. It's something that's given, and it can only be given in the right set of circumstances. So we were given the gift, I'm going to show you in a minute, to the 2 young men that we interviewed. They gave us the gift of a Haka that we're allowed to share with you as a means of thanks, a gratitude, and also a means of celebrating possibility of future collaboration with TDPS. So that's why it was appropriate for us to receive a Haka from them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really interesting is we saw haka in a lot of different contexts. We saw it as a cultural performance in a museum. We saw it as a really personal experience between four people. We saw it in the kind of commercialized, like tourist zone, Rotorua. We saw it, and we'll show you clips. Like, it's really different in every context, and the language changes because it's usually specific to a tribe. But when it's in that kind of commercialized zone, it's watered down to the point of like generic haka. So yeah.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the two gentlemen, Kori, they're from different tribes. So although they are now at a place where they're actually performing the same haka, you'll notice that the movements that they're doing are unique to where they're from. Great.
And I know we're short on.
So I'm going to show you a little taste of this. So this was, we went and saw a cultural performance of haka at the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and then also got to interview all of the performers afterwards. So this is where Victoria and I started understanding more about the difference between kind of what is sacred and then also what's more kind of commercial performative in terms of how these cultures and traditions are passed along and shared in New Zealand and elsewhere. So this is a little bit.
And most of these performers also participate in competitive haka groups, so they go to nationals, and it's very much like sport-like in certain circumstances.
Used by the All Blacks.
Yes, yep. Although most people that we talked to were pretty dismissive of the All Blacks haka.
And said that very authentic.
And that was the critique for the most part. And so to give you a sense of context too, this takes place in a theater space that is part of a national museum on the waterfront. So it is very museum-ified, if you can't tell from the video with the costumes.
Alright, I'm going to pause that one there. So I do want to share this one. So this, they actually shared this for us. It was in the middle of a cafeteria. And it was phenomenal to be in a space, to me, where, right, students were around eating lunch, people were selling coffee, and they're just like, and now we're going to share this gift with you.
And they stood up in the middle of the cafeteria and everybody was cheering around.
It was awesome. So, oh no. I'm still getting chills watching it, right? But yeah, so a lot of this haka was meant to intimidate, but it's also the fierceness that you're seeing is not it's not anger. It's actually intense. Well, it could be intense love, right? Intense joy. It's very celebratory in a sense. So I'm not going to show you this one. But this is another example of a commercial haka performance. So Victoria and I actually got to participate in this performance when we attended the Mutai Maori village. We were, because of our connection with Tui as well, we got to offer a karanga call to the group. So.
And somehow I lost that video, so you don't get to see it today. Thank goodness.
So besides haka, which actually haka literally translates to fire dance. So some of what you were seeing, the haka was actually the movement attached to the strong vocalizations. So one of the other vocal traditions that we learned about is the waiata. So the tradition of waiata is a Maori song, usually commemorative of some important event. So this is an example of a waiata song that we experienced at Auckland One. I'll skip forward. So this one, this is again, the students at Unitec performed a waiata song for us while we were visiting.
And it starts at 48 seconds, I think.
So specifically we learned in terms of what I might, in terms of being able to teach and share tradition and culture, waiata songs are something that is shared regularly, right? Whether Hakava, Maori, Pacific, Islander, right?
For instance, the performance group at Unitec always does a waiata together before they do a stage production. It's something that is, not specific to a group of people. It is just a song of thanks and appreciation. Something we can bring into the classroom for sure.
Yeah. Good. Pause that there. Yeah, they as a warm up, they'll bring themselves together and breathe together, sing together before doing a show performance. So the last vocal practice that we learned about and jumped into was the karanga. So karanga, or a call out or summon, it's an element of cultural protocol of the New Zealand Maori people. It's an exchange of calls that forms part of the Pōwhiri Maori welcoming ceremony. It takes place as a visiting group moves onto the marae or into the formal meeting area. So karanga, what's unique and special about karanga, it's something that's only performed by the women in Maori culture. So this is something, especially if I'm looking at female vocal empowerment, something only the women get to do, and it's very sacred. So we experienced a number of Pōwhiri welcoming ceremonies when we were over in New Zealand, and karanga was the call that the female would do to welcome you into the home, to welcome you into the environment. It's also a greeting when out in nature, right? So to welcome, some of the karanga we did was to welcome the sea, or to welcome the woods and the creatures that were in the woods. So it's very holistic in thinking. And it was pretty special that we got, I think, really special that we were able to experience it.
Yeah, and the way this tradition is passed down is through something called a karanga wananga, which is basically like a weekend-long workshop where women teach other women how to do the karanga. And being there in person, we got to meet with Whailinda, who is an elder who, when we were there in person, invited us to come on this weekend-long women's retreat where we learned some of the karanga, but we couldn't record a lot of this. It all takes place in the marae, which is the sort of sacred space on campus. So some of it we could record and some of it we couldn't.
Yeah, but so while we were staying on the marae, we learned, almost everything was in te reo, Maori. So it was amazing the level of learning that happened when neither of us spoke the language, and yet leaving that experience, how much te reo we actually understood by the end of it. Learning about karanga and also just spending time with a huge group. That was the group of women at the very beginning. So because we couldn't film a lot, this is, and actually specifically at Unitec and the Marae, we've been invited by Whaia Jess and Whailinda to bring back students. And one of the conversations I'm in right now with Unitec is it possible to bring a group of women to go stay on the marae and create a co-production with a group of women from Unitec that could be performed in maybe the 2020-2021 or 2021-2022 main stage season. I want to show you just a taste of this. I don't know, should we, what do you advise, Bobby?
We do need to move on to Tabitha's presentation.
But we can post this and make it
Yeah.
shareable, and we are available to talk afterwards, like at a.
Great, so this is, some of the, so what we learned, this is a video of Victoria and I, actually doing one of the Waiata songs with a group of women. This was in the rehearsal, and then, we also brought one of the Waiata songs, to perform actually in conversation with the sea, as part of the learning of the vocal practices. And then lessons learned. So some of the biggest takeaways for me, especially in terms of how New Zealand operates as a country, is the bicultural approach to learning. So that it's Maori and then everybody else, right? So also the power of in-person connections. So being able to actually be there, even though I had sent millions and millions of emails before going there, most of what happened, the connection happened when we were there in person, where one person would actually say, oh, you actually have a desire to learn about this in a deep way. Let me connect you with so-and-so, let me connect you with so-and-so, to learn more about these practices. A big takeaway is navigating the sacred and the secular in terms of performance practices. So karanga, for example, is much more sacred in terms of what can be shared in terms of vocal practice, where waiata, not in the same way. That's something that I could very easily share and teach in classrooms.
I have a lot of thoughts about this experience in as it pertains to this, which I would talk to you about happily afterwards.
Appreciation versus appropriation. What does cultural exchange look like? So this is a big takeaway, especially for anyone who is going to go do more research trips and through IPCCR, is that something that was very important for Victoria and I was that we were giving back. So with every exchange, there was a class that I led, there was a workshop that I led, there was a conversation that we had, so that it was an exchange of ideas and practice. It wasn't
Just taking.
yeah. And then also tips about how to do field research. I could not have done this without an assistant, someone who could film or audio record or just be a secondary source of absorbing information while we were interviewing all of these people, sitting in our classrooms with students, even just helping to navigate and drive on the other side of the road. It was really, really useful. So for faculty that are looking to propose future IPCCR grants, I highly encourage bringing someone along with you to support the process. So, and then I did present this work. I got to present it in Seattle immediately after. This is a video clip of how I'm taking some influences from Maori culture and practice and putting it into my own work when I'm developing pedagogy as a voice practitioner. We talked about the possibility of a co-production, and then also the next step. Victoria's helping me starting in January. Also thank you to IPCCR. We're going to start working on the Trojan Women, which will involve some of these vocal practices. And that was us.
We do need to switch over to Tabitha's presentation here.
Absolutely.